Hello, hello folks, this is Mr. Wise. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about some things we can do in Animate. I'll go ahead and create a new document here, or you can choose one of the presets up here. Let's go ahead and just do an HD document, like HDTV. 30 is usually good, and you want to make sure this is ActionScript 3.0. The width is already set for HD. We'll hit create. Now we can zoom in and zoom out here. We can also go through scenes. Later we'll learn that scenes are small sections that are compartmentalized. We can create them and do a scene that's animated and then another scene after that, put them in linear order so that we don't have to work with one long, huge, continuous timeline with a bunch of layers here. We can do individual scenes that can be strung together as separate compartments that make up one video. We also can zoom in, zoom out, and use this magnification to fit this to window, which is pretty handy. I use that a lot. We have all our basic tools here in the timeline. So tools is context sensitive. When you click a tool here, you'll see all the options for the document, the current frame, which is this, the object, and the tool. We can also put in object mode and control things like the size, the width, etc. We can also control color here and gradients, radial, linear, etc. Two handy keys you want to learn are F5 and F6. So if I go ahead and make shape here, you notice this becomes filled, meaning it has art on it. I can go here, and if I hit F5, it makes it basically doesn't create a new keyframe. It just continues this one so that the art still exists, but there's no keyframe because nothing's changing here. If I were to go here and hit F6, that makes a new keyframe. So this could be a separate piece of action where, let's say that this moves. I'm double clicking it. You'll notice these little dots. If it was not created in object mode, it's actually separate pieces. And we don't necessarily want that, so I'm going to undo here. If you accidentally made it without it being in object mode, you can double click it and hit Command on Mac, G. Now it's an object that's grouped. Okay, so if I were to move this down here, because this keyframe here is a different location than this keyframe here is moving. Now you'll notice it's not animated, it just goes from one to the other. The other way we can do this is to make what we call a tween. I'm going to go ahead and delete all of this. There we go. Maybe. There we go. These are all excuse me, empty keyframes now. So I'll go ahead and make a shape here. I will try and make sure it's in object mode just to be on the safe side. And what I'll do is right click here. You can see my keyframe and it'll last for a while here. We'll do create classic tween. You can always just hit OK on this box. It's basically saying this object isn't the right thing to tween. You just ignore this and always hit OK. Now notice this is a special type here. What I'm going to do is go down here. So basically I'm going a few frames into the future, and then I'm going to tell it where it is in the future. So it starts out here, and I know it ends here. It will do the rest for us through a process called interpolation. So interpolation means knowing the value of one end of spectrum and another, and it means that you can figure out all the steps in between to make it go from A to B. That's what it has done for us here. It's interpolated those frames. So that's a basic animation. Let's talk really quick. Oh, one other thing. Now if I wanted this to kind of move to another spot, I could make another keyframe. I could right click here and do insert blank keyframe. If it's blank, it does not bring the art from the previous part here. So now I could put something else. So this part basically ends then because this is a blank keyframe with new art. And then I could right click here to create classic tween. Once again, we just hit OK on that. Let's tell it where it should end. Now, this isn't that long, my tween here, so I can go out here and hit F5. That might do it. Or, there, I didn't insert frame. And that should allow us to kind of drag this. Frames can be a little hard to work with, like this one here. Extending this should be easier than it is. And see, now this ended up here with the blank spot. So these can be a little tricky. Let me see if I can get rid of all these. Shift F5 here, remove frame, should do that. Now, because those are gone now, I have this here. If I went here and hit F5, it should extend all that. There, that made it a little easier. Now, I'm going to tell it where it has moved in the end. So notice it's making a tween for me. I'm going to do a different type of tween here. Last time I did classic. Let's try this. Now, I'm going to make sure I go over here to my properties for this. I want this font to be a lot bigger. I will triple click this to select all the text. You could just go like this, or you could go 1, 2, 3. I guess I can double click the line, but not triple select all of it. Sometimes that works. Let's do that. Check the fill. When I click in there, you saw it brought out that color selector. So let's go here, right click. Now this is already a tween, so I want to remove that classic tween there. Now I'll do a motion tween. Once again, we just hit OK. Okay, it's going to put this on a new layer now. You can turn this eyeball off to check that. For the motion tween, I'm actually going to try and have it retroactive here. So these are on two different layers. They're independent of each other. For each different or separate animation, you basically have to do it on a different layer. You can't animate two objects moving two different directions in a motion tween on the same layer. So these are coexisting above each other. They're basically layered, kind of like transparencies. Okay, so this, I have a filled keyframe here, and you can see this down here is moving because of the tween, but up here we have this ready to go. It's just it hasn't changed locations. It was set in one location there and nothing has changed here, so it's ready for a tween because it right clicked and said tween, but nothing's changed. So let's move the playhead ahead a little bit here. We'll move this out and check this out. These little dots here are showing the interpolated frames between A and B. I can actually move these by clicking on them, so these refer to particular frames. So if I hit the enter key, it does this. Now, these are frames, not seconds. And you'll see this is 30 frames per second, and I'm at frame 20. So 30 frames per second, that means here at 1 second we've used 30 frames. So keep in mind this is moving pretty fast. I can grab these and extend them. What it's going to do is, I said it figures out each frame and where it needs to be at that point in time to slowly transform from A to B. Well, when we increase the overall length of the animation, the same motion is happening but in a lot more frames, which means it actually moves slower. Notice that hello is now moving a lot slower. We can do the same thing here. Now notice it only moved this particular section for this classic tween. I can try and move this over here. Moving these ones is a little bit harder. There we go. Now I will undo. One thing you can try, there's shortcut keys that sometimes work to pull the whole thing. It's not working so great on this one here. We can look it up real quick. One option we have is to edit multiple frames, which I'll show you in a second. Actually, that might be a better option there. Just holding shift and selecting that whole range. If I click there, hold shift and click there, it selects the whole range. And then as I move it, it'll stretch the whole thing out. I guess the term would be relative length. So this one started out longer than this, longer than this. Now they're all longer, but they are relative to each other as far as the length they were originally. Okay, that's a few aspects. Animate. Let's talk about symbols next. Symbols are compartmentalized things with internal animations. For this, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of these layers here. Okay. Now, imagine we have to make a bee. So I'll leave a black stroke around it and a fill. I'm going to make this bee pretty simple. I'm not going to do all the stripes and the head on it. Well, maybe. What the heck. Let's go for it. To quickly show off some of these modes, I'm going to put this in paint fills only. Okay, let's go back to these ovals. This is the same as this, and I do want this in object mode for sure, so I'm going to give it kind of a lighter color with a black stroke. I could copy and paste that. So I'm doing Command C, Command V. If you don't like it to go in a different spot, you can undo and do Command Shift V. That should put it in the exact same spot. If I hold Shift, I can drag it exactly over. Okay, we have a basic B here. So here's an issue. If I make this a motion tween, it's going to tell me multiple objects. You can't do that. I can make them symbol. Well, let's not do that right now. Let's select these. Let's right click here. Actually down here, sorry, on the object, and distribute to layers. I will turn the eyeball off, see what's what, so I'll double click the name and make that right wing, hit enter. Accidentally hit a space there, I won't let you do that. I'll turn the eyeball off and on here to know which one that is. That's the left wing. And then that leaves this by process of omission to be the bee's body. Okay, so if I make each of these a tween, remember this box while I show, just hit OK. You can ignore it. Alright, I want this bee's wings to flap, and I also want the bee to move, fly across the screen. So I'm going to say, well, you started here, maybe at 5 frames, these wings need to transform. You'll see this little circle, that's this transform point. If I hit this free transform here, I can actually move this point right there to the body. And then I can move it up. I'll do the same thing here at the same time. Move the transform point over there. See this little rotation icon I get slightly outside of the corners? I'll try and go up about the same amount. Okay. Then here, maybe 10. Actually, if this is 5 frames, and I want it to go all the way to the back, because it started in the middle, so 5 frames to go up, it'll be 10 frames then to get all the way to the back. So let's go 10 frames from 5, F15, and then we'll tell it, hey, you need to be to the back now. Okay, we have one flap. Now here's the problem. We're going to have to keep going and doing that. So 10. 10, 10, 10. As you can see, this process is very tedious. Now keep in mind at this point, the wings are just flapping, the bee is not even moving. So let's create some movement. I want the bee, by 1 second, to have flown over here, and I want it to be in a curving line. Okay, now we have a problem. The bee has these curves, the wings don't. Well, that's simple, right? Why don't we, at this point in time, move the wings to where they need to be? Well, let's go back and look at how that actually worked out, though. Okay, well, we didn't curve it like we did the bee, right? So maybe we just need to curve them more. Let's grab this and try and move it down here. Let's get a little better. But imagine if we have a complicated path, we're going to have to do this for everything and hope that these curves match up. This is not the way to do this. Let me show you how you should. We're going to use what's called a symbol now. So we're going to create our bee body. Yellow with a black stroke. I'll put my paintbrush back on. I'm going to make it black again. I'm going to make size maybe slightly smaller. I'll make sure again that it is paint fills only. We can give it a little black head this time. We'll give it a wing. Now once again I have object mode on here. That's the same thing here and here. Definitely helpful because you don't want this where it has all those little dots in it and functions as separate pieces, as I showed you before. I always refer to that as paint. It's kind of like paint instead of being objects. We want objects. Okay, I need to move these up a little bit, I think. You can use the arrow keys to nudge too. I like that because I can work on finding increments here. Just want these kind of vaguely symmetrical. Alright, this time what we're going to do is select all of this. I'm using the arrow key and dragging a selection around all of it. And I will go up here to modify and do convert to symbol. Now we named a symbol here, and you definitely want to do that. I'll put B. This B kind of functions with where I want center mass to be in rotation stuff from the center. So I'll go ahead and just register in the center. Now there's two types here, or three, sorry. Movie clip, button, and graphic. A movie clip used to be super important. It used to have a lot of functions for ActionScript 3, which is the programming language for Animate. Here's the issue. It is not as powerful anymore. Apple has completely phased out ActionScript, which is what made Flash special, right? So now they're using completely or just purely open source HTML and CSS, JavaScript and stuff to make new stuff in Animate. That means that the movie clip has lost most of its power. Unless you're just making a straight video file, you can't really use web files that use the advanced functions of this anymore because it doesn't support ActionScript on Apple devices. So movie clips used to be the way to go. They are not anymore unless you're doing very specific stuff. Button you won't really ever use unless you're doing some advanced animation or programming for a website. Graphic is now the way to go. So the way graphic works, and the big distinction between these for what we're doing here, movie clip cannot be previewed on the timeline. That means if you make an internal animation inside this, then you go to your main timeline and hit enter or play to preview it, you will not see it. You can only see it in the final movie. It makes it really hard to line up multiple internal symbols that have their own internal animations but need to coexist with each other or interact with each other on the main timeline. So we're going to do graphic and we'll name it. Okay, now I can see that I'm just in my scene and this guy is now the B symbol over in my library. I will double click it. Now you can see we're actually inside the B symbol itself. It has its own internal timeline. So what I want to do is click this and this. I'll hold shift to get both these. I want these to be one object. I'll hit Control G. Now the reason, because I want to select all of these and I want to right click again and do distribute to layers so that each have their own layer. The problem is I don't want the head and the body to be separate. I want them to move together. So I group them first. I want these ones to be separate because remember, each distinct animation should have its own layer. So I'll do, now notice you could do, on a Mac this would be Command Shift D, but I'm on a PC, so Control Shift D, distribute to layers. Boom. It gives each of those its own layer. Once again, I'll turn the eyeball off and on so I can see what's what. Double click and type body and hit enter. Double click, L wing. Now if it gives you that thing about special characters just because you put a space into it, that's alright. It'll just put in an underscore for you. It doesn't allow spaces. Don't freak out though if it gives you a message saying something about the layer name or special character. See, I'll go ahead and put in a space just so you see what it does. I'll hit enter. It just tells you can't do that, but that's fine. It won't ruin your animation. Just hit OK and it will put in an underscore for you. Now each of these needs to have an internal animation. All I have to do for internal symbol is make the wing go forward once, back once, and then return to neutral. Here's the reason why. It is going to loop. So because it's starting out in the middle, I need it to go forward, back, and then return to the middle. And then when it jumps from the end back to the beginning, there's no cut or no stutter. It's in the same position that it started, so we don't see any break in the looping. Okay, so first of all, the body in this case is not going to move. It doesn't even need to be a motion tween. So I'm going to figure out if I go 5 frames up, 10 frames back, 5 frames this way, that's a total of 20 frames. So I'll go forward to 20 frames and I'll just hit F5 for the body. No animation needed, it's just going to be neutral for these. I'll right click and do create motion tween. I'm going to bring this back to here so you'll line up. Create motion tween, same thing. Okay, so at 5 frames, this guy is going to move. So once again, I'll click this. I will move the point of rotation right in the middle. You'll notice it uses something called snapping. It doesn't just kind of let you move it anywhere. It helps snap it to corners, centers, etc. That's good for what we're doing now. If you ever want it off, though, you can turn it off. Now, if you wanted to line these up perfectly, let's look at another way you can do that. I will use a free transform just to line up this point. But I could type in exact rotation. Like here, I could go up to Window and Transform and put that down here. Look at my rotation, -45. Well, what if we went to this one? We could put in an exact amount. Let's click there and type 45, see what happens. Okay, well that's exact. Now these two match up. They would match up better if I copy and pasted this one originally and then held shift and dragged it over so it stayed perfectly horizontal. Then I knew they're perfectly aligned. This time I just kind of did it by eye though. Okay, so starting from neutral, it takes 5 frames here. Well, I'm not going to waste my time taking it back to neutral. I'll do 10 frames to take it all the way to the back. So 15. We could drag this if you wanted. Let's try -45. I need to click ahead here. Alright. And then here's one thing we can do to make sure these match up exactly with the beginning. I can copy properties, go here, and paste properties. Let's try that out. That ensures exact alignment between the position, the first frame, and the last. That way they'll loop perfectly. Now here's the only issue though. Technically all these are movement, but right here you have one frame of it being in the same spot. When it loops, you have one frame of it being in the same spot. These will stay in place for 2 frames, whereas the rest of these are each only 1 frame. So let's see if that makes sense. If this loops, it's going to hold for 2 frames here to here. So it's in this position here and here when it loops. It'll stutter for just a second. Now, if I were really looking to make this perfect, I would change that a little bit, but honestly at this point, I'm not going to be too picky about it. So from the B to get back here, I can hit this. Now anything you do here, notice that this is 20 frames. So anything you do here will loop when you go back to main window, but the rule is the length of this, when I put it in the main window, has to be at least as long as the longest thing in the internal animation. So if I go here and let's say I bring this back to here. Now we're not seeing the internal animation we did. Well, that's because it was 20 frames and we're only giving this a window of 10 frames. Internally it's 20. Let's see what happens if we make that internal window a lot bigger though. Okay, you can see those are looping, right? We don't have to go through and animate those wings every single time they move. We animate it once in the internal symbol and let it loop. This is why symbols are so important. Another good example would be things like wheels on a car. Let's say the wheels are moving up and down, the car's going over bumps, it's rotating, it's translating, aka moving up and down, all that. So wheels need to rotate constantly, but also stay in position with the car. And rotate with the car when it goes up and down hills and all that. So you would definitely want to do the rotation internally so it loops, and then on the main timeline, you would move the whole car as a symbol. Okay, so we've got this guy here. If I hit enter again, because it's a graphic symbol, you can see it on the main timeline. This would not work with the movie clip. Yes, it would actually be animated, but we could not preview it here. So here's the other cool thing we can do. Since this is all internal, all we have to do on the main timeline is right click this and do a motion tween. And now we can move the whole animated thing. Now this will make everything a little smaller. Probably want to drag this out to like say 10 seconds. It's going to move a little slower. That might be too slow. Okay, let's say I realized my wings were too slow. Let's say instead of shrinking this here, I wanted this to be as long, but I wanted the wings to go faster. One thing we could do then would be to double click this to go inside it. Let's shrink the amount of time that this animation takes to happen. Now this is stationary. I don't care about it, so I'll just go ahead and remove these frames. This though, I can't just remove these because I've got action that happens here. I'm going to have to basically take these over here. It's going to have the same action, but now it's shrunk down to happen more quickly. The same amount of action, but in less frames. Basically, you can think about that happening in a shorter amount of time. So the action will just be faster. And I can back out here. Let's see what happens. Okay, check it out. Those wings are faster. Now, sometimes people get stuck where they have done a whole complex animation with lots of different elements moving at lots of different speeds, and they realize one element needs to be faster or slower. Well, at that point, you need to just change the speed of that one element. However, if you make an entire complex animation with lots of layers and different individual moving elements, and you realize the whole thing has to be faster or slower, at that point, it's probably too much work to go through every single little timeline, every single layer, every single little section here that's been animated and change it to adjust for the speed. One option you can do is change the overall frame rate at that point. So adjusting the frames that happen per second, if you have less frames happen per second, it will be slower. If you have more frames happen per second, you're getting the same amount of action, but you're packing more of it into each second, so it will be faster. Alright folks, I think that's a great intro to get you started with symbols and basic animation. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy Animate.